I never thought I'd be the person posting one of these, but here I am. It feels like my whole life is crumbling around me, and I don't know what to do anymore. My husband David has been acting so strangely for months now, and I can't help but feel like he's hiding something from me. I need advice, reassurance, or just someone to tell me I'm not going crazy. David and I have been married for 5 years now, and up until recently, things were pretty good between us. We met in college, and he was everything I could have ever wanted in a partner: kind, funny, ambitious, and incredibly supportive. We had dreams of traveling the world together, starting a family, and building a life that we could both be proud of. But now, everything feels different, off. I don't even recognize the man I'm married to anymore, and I'm terrified that he's keeping a secret that will destroy our relationship forever. David and I met during our junior year of college. We were both studying business, but we didn't really cross paths until a mutual friend invited us both to a party. I'll never forget the moment I saw him for the first time. He was standing by the keg, laughing with his friends, and he just had this infectious energy that drew me in. I wasn't the type to approach guys at parties, but something about David made me feel bold that night. We ended up talking for hours, completely ignoring everyone else around us. He had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room, like everything I said mattered to him. It wasn't long before we started dating, and from that moment on, we were inseparable. David was the kind of boyfriend who went out of his way to make me feel special. He'd leave little notes in my backpack before class, surprise me with flowers when I was having a bad day, and take me on spontaneous road trips just because he knew how much I loved adventure. I felt so lucky to have found him, and I knew early on that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. After we graduated, we both landed jobs in the city and moved into a small apartment together. We didn't have much money, but we were happy. We spent our weekends exploring the city, going to concerts, and dreaming about our future. It was perfect, or at least, it felt perfect at the time. Looking back now, I think the first sign that something was wrong started about 8 months ago. David had been working at his company for a few years and had just gotten a big promotion. I was so proud of him. He'd worked so hard for that position, and I knew how much it meant to him. The promotion came with a lot more responsibility though, and he started traveling more frequently for work. At first, I didn't mind. I was happy that his career was taking off, and I wanted to be supportive. But as the weeks went by, I started to notice little changes in his behavior. He was coming home later and later, often with the excuse that meetings had run late or that he'd had to grab drinks with clients. He was always exhausted, barely able to keep his eyes open by the time he got home. Our conversations started to feel more superficial, and we stopped having the deep, meaningful talks we used to have. Then, the weekend trips started. He'd tell me that he had to go out of town for work-related conferences or team-building exercises, but the details were always vague. Whenever I asked for more information, he'd brush me off, saying it wasn't important or that I didn't need to worry about it. I wanted to trust him, I really did, but something didn't feel right. It wasn't just the late nights and trips that concerned me. David had also become more secretive with his phone. He used to leave it lying around the house, but now he always kept it with him, even when he went to the bathroom. If a text came in while we were watching TV, he'd quickly swipe the screen before I had a chance to see anything. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the more I noticed these things, the harder it became to ignore the nagging feeling in my gut. Things really started to escalate when the late-night phone calls began. It was always the same. His phone would ring around midnight, and he'd immediately step out of the bedroom to take the call. He'd pace around the living room, talking in hushed tones, and when he came back to bed, he'd give me some vague explanation about work emergencies or a last-minute client call. At first, I believed him. David's job was demanding, and I knew that sometimes work bled into his personal life. But after the third or fourth late-night call, I started to get suspicious. Who was calling him at that hour? And why did he always seem so on edge when he came back to bed? I tried to ask him about it one night, but he just got defensive. "It's nothing, babe," he said, avoiding eye contact. "It's just work. You don't need to worry about it." But I was worried. I was worried because I could feel him slipping away from me, and I had no idea how to stop it. Over the next few months, the distance between us grew. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, too. We used to talk about everything, from our dreams and fears to the silly little things that happened during our day. But now, our conversations were limited to the basics: what we were having for dinner, whether the bills had been paid, and how his day at work had gone. I tried to be understanding. I told myself that he was under a lot of stress at work, that his new position was taking up more of his time and energy. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. There was a wall between us, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't break through. One night, I decided to surprise him with a special dinner. I made his favorite meal, homemade lasagna, and bought a bottle of his favorite wine. I wanted to remind him of the life we used to have, to show him that I was still here, waiting for him to come back to me. But when he walked through the door that night, he barely looked at me. He mumbled something about a rough day at work and went straight to the bedroom without even acknowledging the effort I'd put into the evening. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the lasagna that was still bubbling in the oven, and I felt my heart break a little more. About a month ago, things reached a breaking point. It was a Saturday afternoon, and David had left the house for another one of his mysterious work trips. I was cleaning up around the house when I found his old tablet shoved in the back of a drawer. I hadn't seen it in years, and I assumed it was dead, but out of curiosity, I decided to plug it in and see if it still worked. When the screen lit up, I noticed that David was still logged into his Instagram account. I wasn't snooping, I swear, I just wanted to see what he'd been up to. But what I found made my stomach drop. David had a second Instagram account, one I'd never seen before. I clicked on the profile, my hands shaking as I scrolled through the posts. The account was filled with pictures of David at fancy restaurants, on beach vacations, at high-end events. But none of these were things I knew about. He'd never mentioned any of these trips or dinners to me, and there was one constant in almost every photo: a woman. She was stunning. Long dark hair, flawless skin, and a figure that made me feel inadequate just looking at her. In some of the photos, David had his arm around her waist. In others, they were sitting side by side, laughing and looking into each other's eyes. They looked so comfortable together, like they'd known each other for years. I felt like I was going to be sick. My worst fears had been confirmed. There was someone else. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself. I had to confront him. When David came home the next day, I was waiting for him in the living room, his tablet open on the coffee table in front of me. I didn't even have to say anything. The moment he saw the screen, his face went pale. "Explain this," I demanded, my voice shaking with anger and fear. He stared at the screen for a moment before finally looking up at me. "It's not what you think," he said, but I could see the guilt in his eyes. "Then what is it, David? Who is she?" He hesitated for a long time before finally sitting down on the couch. "Her name is Olivia," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's a colleague. We've been working closely on a project for the past year." "A colleague?" I repeated, my heart pounding in my chest. "Then why are you hiding this from me? Why didn't you tell me about her?" "I didn't think it was important," he said, his voice defensive now. "It's just work, okay? We're friends. Nothing more." "Friends?" I scoffed. "You expect me to believe that you're just friends with her? David, you've been lying to me for months. You've been sneaking around, taking late-night phone calls, going on trips I knew nothing about, and now I find out you've been spending all this time with another woman? How am I supposed to believe that there's nothing going on?" David ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have told you about her, but I didn't want you to get the wrong idea." "The wrong idea?" I repeated, feeling a wave of anger wash over me. "I've had nothing but the wrong idea for months because you've been lying to me. How could you do this, David?" David left that night. He packed a bag and said he needed some space to clear his head. I didn't stop him. I couldn't. I was too hurt, too angry, too betrayed to even think about trying to salvage what was left of our marriage. It's been 2 weeks since he left, and I'm still trying to process everything. David has reached out a few times, but his messages are short and vague apologies without explanations. He still hasn't given me a clear answer about his relationship with Olivia, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust him again. I feel lost. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to believe that we can work through this, that maybe there's a way to rebuild the trust that's been broken. But the other part of me, the part that's been hurt over and over again, wonders if it's time to walk away. I never thought I'd be in this position. I never thought I'd be questioning my marriage, doubting the man I once loved with all my heart. But here I am, posting on Reddit because I don't know where else to turn. So, what do I do now? Do I give him another chance, or is this the end? How do you rebuild trust when it's been shattered like this? I'm desperate for advice, for some kind of clarity in this mess. Because right now, I'm drowning.